eating like I am, you can still eat, and Jake can talk, and then we'll go from there. Okay? Brian.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, everybody, for your time. First off, just want to, I know it's kind of hard to get here in the morning times, but really thank you for your time. So just wanted to get everybody in the same room. So you can see we got staff here, planning board. So we're trying to get everybody in the same room so we can get, rolling in the same direction. We went through this long process of getting our land use plan updated and approved, and now we're in the implementation phase. So part of that implementation phase is understanding what we can and can't do with the plan, what it's supposed to do for us. So that's pretty much why we're here. As a result of that, of our plan, we're going to have some updates coming with our ordinances. Some of those we'll talk about today. Some of them that resulted from not the land use plan, we'll talk about too. Those are some statewide mandates that we got to do. So we'll talk about that too. But for now, just thank you. Keep enjoying your food. Jake's going to start talking a little bit, go through a little bit of presentation. Let's make it as informal as possible. If you guys got any questions, stop us. But we'll try to get us out of here in a timely manner. So I know you guys' time's important. So we'll try not to drag on all day. Okay? But Jake.
Thanks, Brian. Jake Petrosky with Stewart. I know most of you worked with Brian and updating the land use plan. And I'm going to hit the highlights of the plan, and then I'm going to pass it over, or me and Jay are going to do the highlights, and then I'm going to pass it over to Jay and Brian to talk about using it and how really it pertains to you all. And how we can kind of move forward with the vision that was created. So the vision for the plan, and it's important to have a vision and goals, and because it really is something that we're working for towards as a town. And I love this little kind of town graphic that you all have. It's got a lot of different pieces to it, and it's got a lot of character to it. And thinking about the town moving forward and new development that you all want and what you want the town to feel like, you can influence and kind of protect the existing character and create the new character. If you take the same graphic and you take away the windows that face the street, if you take away the trees, if you take away the church, then you don't have as quaint of a small town and the community feel that you have right now. So that's something that we're trying to preserve and reinforce with everything that we're doing, everything that y'all are doing. So the vision that we worked on with the steering committee and members of the public, it talks about the slices of a good life and how we can kind of preserve and encourage that balanced, planned, and purposeful growth. Small town atmosphere, these quality of life pieces like parks and ability to have a sense of community and healthy lifestyle, being attractive and livable and unique town, and then also welcoming to businesses and visitors. The goals touches on identity, the economy, connectivity and mobility, how we get around town, healthy neighborhoods, and then also downtown was a focus here. And you all have a lot going on. There's a lot going on in the town, and it's a good time to have done this plan. And I think it'll hopefully serve you all well moving forward, because there's a lot going on, and hopefully we can use this to help kind of guide the future. So from a land use perspective, there was a land use map, a future land use map as part of this. And this map is really meant to guide the character of development in the coming years. It's not zoning, but whenever a rezoning comes before you or a development plan comes before you, you need to look at this map and look at the plan and make sure that what is being proposed is more or less in line with this plan. And it really just kind of paints a picture of the different character areas of the town. And you can't necessarily see the distinction between the light green area and the yellow area, but you can't on that map there. The light green area is the rural residential area where utilities, town utilities, aren't really likely in the near term. So that would be more lower density, very low density development, not served by water and sewer. The yellow area, which is kind of most of the area on the map, is where you're going to see most of the residential growth in the next 2 or 3 or 5 years, and that's an area that can be served by utilities. And so we talk a lot about what could and should go there, and what development should look like in that area. And then we have kind of the pink-orange area, urban neighborhood, is where you're going to have some infill opportunities and some more medium density residential. And then you have some mixed-use areas and some employment areas that also have some recommendations on what could go there and what it looks like. One of the focuses of the plans and the recommendations in the plan is design. So design of new non-residential development, but particularly residential development. And some of the things that we're talking about in this plan are architectural detail and front porches and materials and landscaping, sidewalks and greenways, open spaces and amenities, and looking at how we can encourage those things in new development and help new development fit the character of Winterville. If you look at what we heard during the process, a lot of what we heard was people loved the older neighborhoods of Winterville. So the area around A.G. Cox and those older homes and streets was really what people thought of as the character and the essence of Winterville. And yes, some of the homes are on smaller lots, but there's front porches, there's trees in the yard and along the street, there's sidewalks, you can walk to the school. And people have a lot of fond memories of riding their bike through those neighborhoods to the school and that sort of thing. That's the kind of thing that we want to preserve, and we want to be true about Winterville in 10 years, in new parts of town. So these are some things that we're looking at. There's a lot of talk about lot size and quality, what makes a quality neighborhood as part of this process, and that was a focus of discussion at the steering committee, and a lot of the for the public too. There's a lot of ways you can do higher density subdivisions poorly. If you just shrink lot size and you don't focus on the design of the neighborhood, this is something what you can get, which is, these are called snout houses. They have kind of just enough width of lot for a garage so you can pull in and out, and there's narrow lots, there's no front porches, there's no trees, there's no on-street parking, and this is a narrow lot without really emphasis on the design. And notice these other pictures have similar kind of density or sizes, but they look very different, and that's something that we're trying to look at. So we don't really want to do poor neighborhood design. Here's another example. This is a duplex subdivision that's just north of town in Greenville. Both of these are in Greenville's jurisdiction. I'm not trying to pick on Greenville, but I want to give you all kind of local examples of what can happen. You can't build a subdivision of duplexes and townhomes the same way you do single-family homes on larger lots, because it might not age well, and it could harm property values in the long run of existing development adjacent to it, and it's just not doesn't if you put this next to some of the older neighborhoods in Winterville or A.G. Cox that what we're trying to emulate, you can see that it's not comparable, right? And in this one, they even try to do some materials. Some of these that have brick facades, but it's still not really what we're looking for. So what we did in this plan is talk about some recommendations on how you could encourage more of a kind of higher quality development. And one of the things that you could do is look at conditional zoning. And here, this process allows kind of custom tailored requirements and character based on each application. It's a legislative process that requires and encourages dialogue, not necessarily quasi-judicial, that is just expert opinions. It's responsive to market demands and respects community conserves, and it's 160D compliant. And Chapter 160D is a new law that says, basically clarifies what zoning can and can't do, and talks about methods, and Brian and Jay will talk a little bit about that, but it's an important thing you'll probably hear more about in the coming year. One of the things that the plan did was, for each of these character areas on the map, we talked about the character in that area. And we had a table that explained, okay, what is the density range that you can have, but also some other key components of the design. So, height, where's the parking, what do the streets look like, what are the block lengths, are there sidewalks, is there open space, what does that open space feel like, and then also what are some potential zoning districts. So a lot of what makes the character of a place, the same thing that separates a really poorly designed subdivision from a nice subdivision, is a lot of these components. So whether it has sidewalks or street trees, or how it feels, and the overall density is one thing. The overall density is just one thing that contributes to the character of that place. So that's something that we're trying to convey. And all these kind of character elements really could be part of increasing standards, or it could be part of incentives, or it could be part of a conditional zoning process that you all can think about. Open space is something that we talked about a lot in the plan. Right now, your current standards, your current ordinances only require open space for certain types of uses, like RV parks. So that's one thing we're talking about here, is where we want to be and what we want to kind of emulate or create as part of the town. But where are you at now in terms of your standards? Right now, you don't require any open space. So some of those things that really can help make a quality neighborhood, you don't really require. So there's some recommendations in the plan that kind of basically to review your open space, recreation, fee in lieu process and your standards for new subdivisions. So one thing that it recommends is increasing open space standards for some new development, and especially a medium or higher density development. When you start to get 2 units per acre or higher, then you might want to have a minimum open space requirement. The other thing it recommends is in these two subdivisions, the top one and the bottom one have the same number of lots, 56 acres, 130 lots, and you're getting a lot of what's on the top, essentially. But if you allow flexibility in lot size with the overall density cap, if open space standards are exceeded, then you can get a little bit more flexibility in terms of and diversity in terms of housing products and design of neighborhoods, while keeping kind of the same number of homes, because I know the pace of growth and what that means for schools and so on and so forth is a concern. But also we heard that we do need a little bit more diversity in housing type, and there's some young families that would like to live in Winterville but can't really do it, or there's some older folks that would like to stay in Winterville but they really don't need the house that they've had for the last 20 years. So this is a new idea, and this is something that your current ordinance doesn't really allow for or incentivize in any way. So this is something that we could list as something to move forward on and make some adjustments with. The other thing, one of the big things from a land use perspective is downtown. So downtown, we looked at everywhere from kind of Main and Mill in this area all the way over to kind of the gateway on NC 11, and really it's three different character areas. The downtown, which is kind of this area right here, there could be some code updates that you want to encourage infill and redevelopment with. West Main, kind of extending here over to 11. Right now, you know, it's kind of residential, mostly residential in character. There could be more of a mix of uses in that area in the future, and then the gateway area is also an important area. I'll touch on a few of these areas. So the downtown area, there could be some things we can incentivize for infill and redevelopment. The plan did recommend a central green space on Market on the square area right now, and that's shown here. West Main, as we kind of go along Main Street, there was some recommendation for thinking about if there's a way to allow for some infill and reuse of existing buildings along West Main. And that, you know, you might need some code updates for that. It also pointed out that if we're going to allow some housing flexibility and some additional types of housing, then these areas within walking distance of downtown would be something that a place where that would be okay. And then as we get over to the Gateway and New Commercial Center on 11, you know, this could be kind of a new area like Beacon Drive, but maybe a little bit better. You know, a little bit designed a little bit more appropriately to fit as a bookend to downtown. So we would want the design of this to be a little bit different. And right now, your current code, you know, doesn't really encourage this. So those are some things that we could do. So code updates. There's some options for improving the design of new development, both residential and commercial. And really, there's three buckets of things we can do. And in some cases, you know, we might just want to do one, or we might want to do multiple ones. But one is increased district standards. So we can increase open space requirements for residential districts, stormwater standards, connectivity requirements, downtown standards. That would be just saying, okay, these zoning districts, we're going to add some standards in order to make sure we're getting quality development. The other thing we can do is add options or incentives. So, you know, it might be that we do, you know, both of these. It could be that we raise open space requirements for some residential districts, but then add some options for some other stuff. So a planned unit development district right now that you have is an option in your zoning code that doesn't have a lot of standards, very clear standards. So how do we want that option to be used, and what do we want to encourage in there? That's something that we can, that Brian can take a look at. Potential for conservation subdivision options. So if you you know, want smaller lots or something like that in that yellow area, maybe there is an option where you can, you know, have more open space go over and above the minimum standard, which currently you don't even have the minimum, but this could be an option that you allow for some flexibility there. Also, there's the area along West Main. Right now, there's a district in the code, a central business transition district, that, you know, that could be used to facilitate some extension of downtown along West Main, but we would want to increase some standards there and make sure that we're clear about, you know, what could go there, what are the parking standards, what are the building standards, and if there is housing, what are those standards for those. And then there is also the conditional zoning option that would allow some flexibility based on a legislative process, a dialogue between the council and developers, where, you know, folks can choose a base zoning district and then add additional development standards to make a new development more palatable to, you know, potentially address expected impacts and include, you know, dialogue with the public as part of that. So these are just some highlights of some things that could have implications in the code, and Jay and Brian are going to talk a little bit about a couple other kind of more policy level recommendations in the plan, and then also get into how to use the plan. But we're going to come back and talk about this, and really hope what we're hoping to get out of this conversation today is to hear from you all and what should be some priorities that Brian is thinking about in terms of implementing pieces of this plan. What do you all see as priorities? So I'm going to hand it over to Jay. He's going to talk a little bit about policy recs.
Thanks. Good morning. Nice to see y'all. I almost said good evening because it's so dark out. But so kind of transitioning from what the land use plan envisions as our aspirational future, our vision. A lot of times my vision for my house isn't how it winds up being after I finish a project, but I'm getting closer to that vision. And so the Unified Development Ordinance, the development regulations, they are not necessarily aspirational, right? The Unified Development Ordinances, the things that Brian and staff have to enforce as the laws of the town, they are the bare minimums that are required to build something or do something in Winterville. So when you want to raise the standards for the bare minimums, there's some negotiations from talking. We can't always jump right to what the plan recommends, but we can move the ball up the field towards that. You know what I mean? And it's incremental changes that matter. So just like you're working on your house, sometimes you just make a little change here and there. You change out a light socket, change out the lock that wasn't working too right. And then sometimes you decide to remodel a whole room, and it takes you a year, but it's a big effort, and it takes a lot more investment of resources. And here, when we're talking about updating the UDO, resources are social capital, right? The goodwill we built with the development community and the residents who are governed by these laws. You'll wind up spending some of that and pushing some of those boundaries, having a conversation whenever you want to change something to move towards a community goal that a lot of people value, but when it comes down to how we're going to get there, there's always, the devil's in the details, right? So I'm not going to spend too much time on these, but these are kind of what we see as the big buckets from the land use plan and what it kind of made recommendations on. And I'm going to go through each one very briefly. Really, the identity was a big issue, talking about improving the key gateways into town and the streetscapes and the public space. That's really where the town has the most influence, is in that public right-of-way, and in at least in this sense. Also talk about continuing the economic development initiatives and continuing to expand the marketing of the town and the sites. And that's internal as well as external. But that's more golf carts than y'all have ever seen in a parking lot before, lined up next to each other. There's a lot about transportation, because that's a big component, and that involves a lot of coordination between the town and the state a lot of times, but then there's a lot of places that the town can control on its own, but these are big and expensive projects. And in particular, one of the things the plan called out was connectivity in Winterville was maybe not what it could be, right? So there's like old Winterville, which is really gridded out and really easy to go for a walk around the block after dinner in the summer. And then there's new Winterville, which has a lot of cul-de-sacs, and there's always pushback when you're talking to a developer when they have to give up a lot to push a road through, to stub out to the farm next to them that'll become the next neighborhood. But making those connections is a way that you can ensure that that area can evolve as things change, right? No one's going to put a convenience store or a little barbershop or any kind of little commercial neighborhood thing on a cul-de-sac, right? But if you have a gridded neighborhood, as that neighborhood changes and things happen over decades, someone might say, hey, this is a good intersection now and I'm ready to start a business here, and the neighborhood might welcome that. So making sure you have that connectivity is important as well. There was a little bit about park recommendations, parks and recreation, continuing to expand recreational opportunities, especially public commons kind of in the downtown area, a recreation center, and continuing with the Greenway projects. So as we start to talk about implementing the plan, it is an advisory and a guidance document, and it does require people to continually checking back with it, making sure it's relevant and finding ways to move the ball forward and basically move the needle just a little bit in the direction of positive action. And just to kind of lay out the way, at least I think about how the land use plan works, I'm going to start kind of at the top. The land use plan at this point is the adopted vision of the community for how they would like, what they value, what they want the vision for the community to be, and what their priorities are. We took it to several public meetings. It's been vetted by multiple committees and appointed boards. I mean, y'all know you were part of the process. So right now, the plan is what residents have used to communicate their goals, values, and priorities to their elected officials, town leadership, and town staff. Now, the elected leadership takes that and they, they're where the rubber hits the road. So they're prioritizing and budgeting. So this is the council. Prioritizing and budgeting. You can't do everything in the plan in 1 year. They're legislating and deciding new rezonings and new special use permits and all kind of land use decisions. And they're also balancing priorities between budgets, taxes, departmental priorities, and community priorities. And so they communicate that to town leadership every year, at every meeting and throughout the budgeting process. Town leadership, and here we're talking about management and department heads primarily. They're responsible for implementing the council's vision, council being elected by the residents. And so they're administering resources as approved by the council and implementing those parts of the vision. And that, of course, gets passed through to town staff, who actually does the work on the ground, mostly. And so the town staff uses the land use plan to communicate, guide, and they're implementing it. And a lot of that conversation comes at conversations, at least at the planning department level, with conversations they have with the development community, with residents. Anytime someone wants to put up a sign for a business, they have to come talk to the planning department, and we have guidelines that presumably have come from the residents to the council through the land use plan, implemented in the Unified Development Ordinance, and then implemented by staff at the permit level. And so then town staff, like it says there, communicates that with the development community on a regular basis. And the development community also has feedback, and the development community in this respect also includes residents. And they also have a way to communicate back. They're always talking to elected leadership and town leadership about where their hot spots are, where it's causing them problems, what they need. And I should have put a dotted line there down from the development community back to town staff, because having worked in local government, I know that they don't necessarily hold their tongue when they're having a hard time with something, or they need to make the numbers work and the code's got something that's not working right for them and maybe could be tweaked. So there's a number of feedback loops. And I'm going to pass it over right now real quick to Brian, who's going to tell you a little bit more in depth about how staff will use the plan and does use the adopted plan.
Brian,
Yeah, I was going to say, any questions before I get going?
it's cold here. Can somebody tweak the thermostat for us? It's got several people putting their coats on.
I think Chief Moore tweaked that one, I'm not sure. Chief, would you tweak the other one?
So any other questions right now? I know it's like drinking water out of a fire hose sometimes when we see this stuff. He's getting it for you. Yeah, it's plenty.
Concerning how the plan is used, he was commenting that the residents was able to communicate their values and visions by attending the meetings and different things like that to get their input. But isn't it true a majority of the public never even come to these meetings?
Absolutely.
And should it not have been like a mailing to just about everyone to blanket the community to truly get their feedback on what they like or don't like?
So it's a great question, and it's a problem that's not easily solved, but when you start talking about mass mailings and mass communications, it really starts blowing that budget. So we've got certain resources we have to use doing that, but the main concept is to be inclusive. So we want everybody to be here. So we do public hearings. We do public announcements. We throw it on our websites, our social media, and the mailings not necessarily would be a good idea because sometimes it doesn't even work. So I've worked in jobs where we actually did mass mailings and actually got less response. So it's not.
We had a really good response, like percentage involvement. I mean, there was probably 500 people that came to meetings or took the survey.
Yeah.
I think we included it on the deals.
Yeah, so, and we did throw it out in the utility bill, so we have a newsletter that goes out, so we have that at our advantage too, so that's something that goes out.
That's probably the best direct marketing is through our newsletter, other than through our website, social media, special announcements, that kind of thing.
But let's be honest, it's not something that somebody sees and gets really excited about. But it should be, because, I mean, and I'll tell you, it gets exciting on my level because, and it should on your level too, because we're actually at a point where there's a lot of interest in Winterville. So a lot of people are, and I was even at the doctor's office yesterday, the PA was telling me, it's like, oh my gosh, Winterville's got it going on right now. Like, I'm like, all right, we'll just take care of my daughter. Like, I'm not worried about what you think about Winterville right now. But so I've got a lot of feedback that people are really interested and really want to be engaged in Winterville. And not only in the development community, people are moving here at a rapid rate at a point where we don't have any lots available. So I think it's an exciting time to be involved in trying to reshape, or the way we do things in Winterville, not necessarily reshape, but just kind of, you know, control our growth in a way that keeps Winterville the way we want it to be.
Brian, Jake, you said over 500? That's,
You count meeting attendance and then also the survey.
that's huge. We probably haven't had a response like that with some other projects we've tried to glean public support and or input. So I do consider that a success, even though the number may seem small for the number of citizens that live in town, but kind of gauging it compared to some of our other efforts, that's really good.
Absolutely. So any questions? No. So how we use the plan in the staff level. So our basic question is, somebody wants to come in and do something on their property. First thing we do is we go to the rezone or the land use map and see if it fits in that, or actually we go to the zoning map and see if it's allowed. If it's not, what do we have to do to get it rezoned? So I wanted you to realize that by the time it gets to you guys, know it's been vetted by our office that it's even viable to come forward. So we've been working with them, whether it's you know, seeing if we're able to provide utilities to it, whether it's going to be acceptable for surrounding community, all that good stuff. So along with that, you know, obviously we're making interpretations of the map. We're giving staff recommendations. We're trying to lead the proposal to an acceptable development. So that's basically not rocket science. It's pretty easy. We go to the maps, we look at it, yes, no. With that, you know, sometimes we'll see something where the plans fall short. That's when we get into a situation where we're amending ordinances and stuff. So, from our end, it's not always very simple, but it can be. Sometimes you have developers that want to do something that's outside the norm, and it doesn't really fit in with our plans. But that's when we have the ability to interpret those plans and make sure we're following the general guidelines. Like Jay said earlier, this is an advisory policy document, so it's not, we don't have to, it's not set in stone. We can, you know, there's gray area in there we can move around with. So it's going to.
So, Brian, based on their recommendations and what we currently have in place, do you foresee that you would have to take to town council for a lot of amendments or changes to what we currently have?
Yes.
Zoning and
Yeah, and you know, going forward, we'll examine what we want to put in there as far as like architectural standards for multifamily or something like that. So that's a big one, you know, as far as how we want developments to look. Obviously, we've got the Senate Bill 355. He was talking about Chapter 160D. So that's a statewide. They're trying to get more comprehensive or more cohesive with those terminologies. That's going to be a big endeavor in itself. But then you throw in, you know, what this plan has done for our code and make sure we're up to date with it. So yeah, I think I don't think we're getting one fell swoop. It's like you just said, we're inching toward that goal, and it's never going to stop. I mean, you know, we're always going to be growing. We're always going to be, you know, trying to improve what we have. So yeah, I anticipate multiple trips before you guys and multiple trips before council for amendments. Yes,
I
sir.
think the idea hopefully is to not wait as long as this last update took to make sure that we keep ordinances and our plans up to speed with our growth. So we really want to try to make sure that we're coming to you more incrementally and as needed, as opposed to these long time periods where we're working with something that's outdated.
so the process will start, you will recognize what needs, you will bring it to planning, and then we make recommendations to the council.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Exactly right.
There's probably some dialogue too in terms of exactly
Yeah, and it may come down to where we're looking at it, we may feel like we need a steering committee. We may need some community interaction on what we need. I don't know if that's going to be the case at this point, but especially with the 160D, we've got really good guidance from UNC School of Government on what we need to do. But based on the plan implementation, we may need to get some, some further guidance from the development community. We may need to get it from our P&Z and then the council as well. Council's going to have a big impact on it, ultimately, because they're the ones that would approve the amendments. Yeah.
Yeah, let me just echo that. From the planning perspective, planning department especially, the typical 1-2 punch is let's get the community together, do a land use plan, get everyone kind of on the same page, have that momentum, and then let's move right into starting to implement the plan, especially in the Unified Development Ordinance, which then, is really the law of development and land use. And especially when you've already got a fresh vision, because if you have to wait for the land use plan, if you have to wait 5 years and things have changed and people are saying, well, we might need to update the land use plan, then you kind of missed an opportunity. So this is really your opportunity for that whole house renovation, at least from that perspective. And there are other goals in there too, not related to the Unified Development Ordinance that y'all might not see as a planning board because they won't relate to land use or land development regulations. So I probably should have included Ms. Parker on a cameo on this one, but since it's mainly talking about town management and department head and how they use the plan. But if I miss anything, I try to get everything. If I miss anything, please let me know. So town management and leadership use a plan to implement the priorities of the council, typically in terms of budgeting and staff resources. They use it to administer and evaluate work plans of department heads and staff. So, you got to set a goal and then try and achieve it. And if you haven't achieved it, how much more do we need to allocate to that? Communicate community priorities to staff, and then also establish accountability, essentially, with staff. So kind of as the link between the elected officials and getting things and the on the ground, boots on the ground, making sure that there's accountability there. Did I miss anything? Okay, all right. If you think so. Okay. And then elected leadership uses a plan to evaluate land use and development application requests. Just like y'all, they see, rezonings and special use permits and so forth. And so they need to be able to state their support for or against, sometimes using the plan as evidence for that, or as a part of the component of their decisions. They're, of course, not bound. Nobody here is bound by the plan necessarily. But it needs to be considered. State statute requires that if we have an adopted land use plan, we consider it. But every rezoning, isn't just, and every land use development application isn't just something that happens in a place, it's something that happens in a point in time. So it might be that you'll get an application or a rezoning that comes in for a piece of land, and it may or may not be consistent with the land use plan, but based on where we are in time and what's around it and so forth, it might or might not be appropriate. You know what I mean? And so that's where y'all are the recommendatory body. I might have made that word up.
I like it.
And
council is the decisive body. And the land use plan is an important component that represents the community's adopted vision, but it's not the only piece of evidence you'll weigh. Just as long as you have considered it, that's what the state cares about. And of course now with the Chapter 160D, if we want to have zoning, we have to have a current land use plan. So that's another important thing. But that wasn't a problem for y'all because you've been having a land use plan for a long time now. Council also used it to make determinations of consistency, and that's also a statutory requirement. And then also to prioritize and budget the community priorities and projects and recommendations that are included in the plan to, again, move that needle towards the Winterville that we all want to be. And so then I used to work with someone who just had 3 spreadsheets taped on his filing cabinet right above his computer, and those were his priorities for the year as delegated by the manager, town manager. And they came from the comprehensive plan. And so that was his accountability every day to himself, was to look at that, and he had to report back on those every month, So that's kind of how this happens, is that staff brings a work plan or a projected budget for certain improvements, usually informed by the comprehensive plan, but maybe by other goals. They take that to the elected leadership at budget time. Elected leadership balances out revenues versus expenditures versus community priorities. Town leadership management implements those and gets those rolling through staff. Staff reports back to leadership on progress, and elected officials hold the manager and the department heads accountable, essentially. And then that cycle kind of continues. And so now as we kind of move forward into the work session, let me just kind of explain. This is where we're asking, I think someone asked earlier about when we'll start to see I believe you asked when we'll start to see these changes potentially come around. And one thing we wanted to include here was an opportunity to get your perspective on what are the goals. And we'll kind of summarize that and make sure that it gets passed on to council for their use as they need, and because ultimately they are the ones that are responsible for the financial resources and the implications of that. So our first one right there has a couple of bit of red font to remind me of the number of changes that are included in Chapter 160D. I don't know if y'all have heard much about it yet, but essentially there used to be side-by-side regulations for enabling towns and counties and cities to govern land use decisions and land development regulations. And over the process of 5 years or so, the state has combined those into one, so it's less confusing, because there used to be very subtle differences between the two, and it was kind of a regulatory, it was just confusing. So they kind of standardized it, and along with that, they kind of refined some things. One of those, a big one, is the improvements to the conditional zoning districts. So, so two big things. One is that you're going to probably need to revise your use table just a little bit to make some tweaks, because we can't have conditional use districts or conditional use permits anymore. From now on, the only thing we can call it is a special use permit, and it follows the same process as it used to, but a lot of places will split and have their conditional use permits go to Board of Adjustment maybe, and their special use permits go to council, and so, or planning board. So there's a lot of different things. So y'all will be having a discussion about that soon.
Does the regulation specify where the governing body, the bodies that it goes?
It doesn't.
It's still a local decision.
It's still a local decision who decides, and so the council can appoint themselves, the planning board, or the Board of Adjustment to handle the special use permits. And there's probably even some flexibility within that, maybe even to split some of those off, like let's say you have really high intensity special use permits and low intensity special use permits. So there's probably still some flexibility there even.
So they just all have to be called special use.
Right, right.
Yeah, it won't change, literally, it won't change the way we operate. It's going to be change in name really only. So it's because some people call a special use permit the same as a conditional use permit. Here we call them conditional use permit. So basically we're just going to change the name conditional use permit, and we'll take out the conditional use district as an option. That won't be an option anymore.
If I'm honest, I'm a little bit behind on the 160D reg, so
He's got you covered.
I'm just catching up.
So the special use will go to the
Board of Adjustment.
Board of Adjustment.
Yes, ma'am.
Like it currently does, like
Okay. So
conditional use
council
permit.
won't have anything to do with them?
No, ma'am. Not unless you guys decide otherwise.
But there's conditional zoning options.
Conditional
Yeah.
zoning options will go before you though.
Right.
So
So
Did you just name out, did you just say high conditional and low conditional? Is that?
high and low special. If y'all, that's an option if people want to decide that. The legislation doesn't necessarily lay that out, but the School of Government kind of has hinted that that's probably an option if people want to continue one way or the other. But let me just say that if we have to change these procedures and standardize them anyway, we have this adopted land use plan. It has character areas with recommendations like Jake went through for density and uses, and maybe want to mix some uses or separate some uses. It's a great time to say, has this use really ever posed a problem? Is there a super intense demand for this use in this district? Maybe it doesn't need to be a special use permit. Maybe it could just be permitted, or permitted with design standards. Maybe it just needs to have a little extra separation from its neighbor, a little extra setback or something. So it's an opportunity to make things easier and more streamlined and more elegant. And then also the conditional zoning process is going to be the only thing we have moving forward, which is great, because the conditional use district rezonings involved a quasi-judicial process. So arguably the conditional zoning, and it was different in a lot of places, right? Everybody was different. So arguably the conditional zoning process that is required is going to make things a little bit more responsive to the public, which may or may not be a good thing, depending on where you are. It's probably a good thing here. More responsive to the public. It's going to be legislative and not quasi-judicial, so there's less procedural hurdles. And then there's also still a community involvement process through the public input meeting, and then the hearings, because it's basically establishing a new zoning district. It's going to be something that I think a lot of people are going to want to use sparingly, because it does create a new zoning district and a lot of new regulations, and it has the potential to kind of really lock a place into one particular use and make it hard for it to evolve and change. But it depends on how the standards are written, and that's kind of why you see at the bottom there. It's an opportunity to look at our standards for how we approve conditional zonings and make sure that they're meeting our needs, meeting our goals. And other opportunities, it's a great time to look at your existing zoning districts, especially since they're tied to the character areas in those tables in the plan, and make sure that they're representative of the vision of the future that we want, and whether or not we need an overlay here to make that to dial that in a little bit, or whether or not we need to relax some things here. But there's a really delicate interplay between the land use plan and the recommendations for the character areas, the future land use map, and the zoning districts, which are still the law of the land in those areas. I'm sorry I digress so much into Chapter 160D. Other recommendations in the plan included coordinated signage and wayfinding as kind of the key gateway corridors, improved walkability and pedestrian connections. There was a lot about parks and facilities, including utilities, and then downtown improvements, and the potential for incentive areas or taxing districts used to improve the area that they serve. So for instance, a lot of places will establish a municipal service district in the downtown, charge a little extra on the taxes, but all those taxes go back into providing some service for that area, just that area, right? So whether it's streetscape improvements or plantings or consolidated dumpster service and dumpster courts, whatever it may be. As we move forward from here into the round table, what we had envisioned was kind of literally going around the table and talking about what each person has as their most pressing concern recommended in the plan for moving forward. Right now, we don't have to worry too much about budgets, I would say, in here. That'll get handled elsewhere. Sorry, right? There, they do, but we could talk about, what we think is the best thing to achieve moving forward. And I'm going to take notes on what y'all are saying, and they'll be typed up there. And then we can kind of have a discussion about that. But whether we're interested in tackling UDO updates first, or capital projects, incentive programs, like we said, maybe a downtown incentive district, or other incentive district, other economic development incentives perhaps, land acquisition, land banking, park projects, or anything else. And then after we kind of get a list down, we can go around and talk about accountability, right? So who do we see as being the key players at the town for implementing those changes? And like I said, this is kind of a bit of a brainstorming exercise, but also it should be a good discussion about how we can start implementing the plan in the next, let's just put a time frame like a year or so, changes we'd like to see in a year or so.
Could we take a few-minute break? Maybe it's a good time.
I'm at your service.
Say about 10 minutes. We'll be back 10:30.
Okay.
That's all right. I got a good bag. That sounds like it's a chance.
Okay, is it not on?
I just wanted to make sure
I
that
think
this microphone was,
Is there a light or something that's on?
no, it should be.
Oh.
No, it should be. It's working.
Oh, okay.
But it's, I wanted to make sure that it was going through here, it was not twisted around.
Oh, gotcha.
So it's a pretty neat little thing, really.
Yeah, that's cool.
Because it's, I actually have one for my TV.
Oh, yeah, right.
And that, but this works well for one person, for the speaker and me.
Right. Yeah, my dad uses, they call them TV ears. And it's like headphones that he'll wear whenever him and my mom are watching TV.
Yeah. Well, the one that you paired directly to, like I can turn the volume totally off the TV, no volume. And I can hear it actually in 2 or 3 adjacent rooms.
Oh, that's kind of funny. Nice. Yeah, nice. Cool. So, but it's working?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
It is.
Great. Thank you. Froze up.
Look, all your fancy technology, you might have to end up using them.
That's right. That's right. Hope you can write big. Damn.
Unless it'll give me something, give me something to do. I can write, you can talk,
I wonder if they don't have it in front of them.
Doug has one.
Yeah, he's the only one. Right.
He's like an ace student.
Yeah.
Y'all doing a good job.
Thank you. It's so good to see you here. I sometimes forget that you weren't on the steering committee because you were at every public meeting and at most of them, just to see and check in. So. Oh, you were? Oh, no wonder I thought you were on it. Okay.
I think so. Brian and them said, Ms. Robinson, we want you on the steering committee. I said, you sure you want me up there? He said, yes, so I did.
Yeah, that was great.
Just to have our town council, representation.
Yeah.
So that you have an advocate on board and knew what you were doing. That's good.
It helps, yeah. It does help.
Professional.
We try.
This guy lends an air of, credibility.
Good job on it. I gave the guy down the street, he's a copy.
Oh, yeah?
I had 2 copies.
Okay.
I think I had a draft copy and a regular copy. I gave him 3 copies.
Nice.
I had work.
Yeah.
You know it by heart, right?
But I really, no, I don't. You're not gonna be quizzing me. Know what that question means. I was really impressed with the recommendations and things that some of the, I guess probably things that I didn't expect that you knew were gonna be in the plan, you know, you all knew were gonna be there, but I didn't. So I've been really impressed with you. We've just had a, request coming for us, and I think that's what I really want to, come back, because it involves,
Nice. Well, yeah, that's the tension here. Oh yeah, that's kind of the tension.
Yeah, I was there.
board rejected, and I think that was what generated interest, because of course we got to change our mindset somewhat to housing.
It takes y'all being open, but it also takes the person that's bringing it before you to be flexible and willing to put something on the ground that is better for them. You know what I mean? So it takes both sides.
Well, it's taken a lot of mindset to get from some things, concepts, single family homes, and get to the idea that people want that same house.
Yeah, and there's a place for it. It's not out in the outskirts of town. It's right in close, you know, where there's already tight neighborhoods, and that's fine. Yeah, that's
Get
tough.
everybody back so we can get through. Make sure we got time.
Okay.
Rather get out early than not. Rather get out and not go.
Right.
Can everybody start moving back towards your seats? It's 10:30, so we can get back started and get our presentation in today. Can everybody start moving back? Okay. I forgot I had to wait for the town manager to get here. I'm sorry. I'm a middle school teacher, you know how we do it. So, y'all had to excuse me.
No, we like it. You know, it's hard to wrangle this thing in.
Yeah, everybody get back in so Jake and them can finish.
Well, at least make it.
I figure we just pass this down.
Good. Excellent.
I'm at
There is probably one accessible at the town's website. Yeah.
You just get started. Look, you get started. That's where you get them on task. You get started.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
I got to give it to him. And while we're waiting for a few more people to come in, please remember our mayor is in the hospital, and just remember him as you pray. Just he's a real tough guy now, and hope that he'll be back soon. That he's been a great inspiration to our town and great for our town. So we like to pray that he'll be able to be back pretty soon.
Thank you. We were envisioning kind of a roundtable going around and talking about our priorities, and maybe you have something picked out from the plan specifically, and it's item 2.3 or something like that, or maybe you just have kind of some general thoughts about things that need to be addressed as a priority in the next year or so. But if anyone's willing to start, we'd like to just kind of start and then work our way around. And like I said, I'll be taking notes, and Jake can answer all the technical details. So he does, and he can run the microphone around.
Having briefly reviewed the plan and listening to the presentation this morning, my top priority that I think that the board, this planning board and the council should make a priority is what was stated, the old Winterville and new Winterville. how we marry those marry the plans together, because we don't want to lose the uniqueness of the old Winterville, but we don't want to stifle growth as we presented the new Winterville. So whatever land use or conditional use or special use that we have to consider, that we do it strategically and with the understanding that maybe years down the road we may have to revisit some other things, but also keep in mind that we don't want to lose the unique part of Winterville. I remember when I first moved here, and as a matter of fact, Councilman Robinson, she made a comment. She said, I used to know everybody that lived in Winterville, but now it's grown to that point now that we don't want to lose that, but we also don't want to stifle ourselves to be limited either. So whatever we do to make sure that we are not having to continuously make amendments and changes to make things fit, but protecting the old Winterville and permitting the new Winterville to emerge.
And let me ask you real quick, what do you see about the, what is the specific character that stands out to you about Old Winterville, and then how does that contrast with the newer development, whatever that may, however you've seen that happen?
For the most part, the old Winterville, or what is referenced to old Winterville, is what was presented, Jake, with the front porch. Maybe the smaller lots, and you got the communities that are connected. Most of what is considered a new Winterville, it seemed to be more subdivisions, and they are standalone subdivision. They're connected within themselves, but they're not really connected to the town as a whole. So even as we are continuously getting requests for land use or plans to be approved, but considering what you do within those subdivisions that carries over still some of the community qualities, that you still are a neighborhood in the greater community.
Well, my concern is parking. The parking here. We don't have enough parking spaces for people. And to get businesses coming in, we're getting some, which is very good, but, if anybody wants to come in, approaches to come in, they gotta have parking. And that's a big concern of mine. Nowhere to park.
Is that in the downtown or in the Highway 11 corridor as
No,
well?
I'm talking about downtown.
Just in the downtown?
Mm-hmm. But parking on the street, there's some parks on the street, but that's not so good either. You've got everything blocked up, the streets are blocked up. And, the reason my concern, I went to a restaurant here, the Dixie Queen, about a week and a half ago now. I met some friends. Okay, they were coming from out of town. So, of course, I went on down, and I could not find a park. I had to ride, it was on a Friday. I had to ride around to finally, I did find a park in the Dixie Queen parking lot, which was a sign up there that said, only compact cars. But it was the only park, so I parked there. And, but then when my friends came, we were waiting for them, and finally, one of my friends with me called them and said, "Where are you?" They could not find a park. They had been riding around, to get a park. And finally, they found one, not in a good area, but they parked there and finally got in. So that's my concern. We need more parking.
There's some short-term, long-term things that we can do. One is Railroad Street. Y'all restriped to have some angled parking, and that got you some new spots. That could continue down. you have kind of the Market on the Square area. If there's some improvements there, maybe you can do a parking lot or, on the south side of it, or also you can think about on-street parking in other places. And because road right-of-ways are actually one of your biggest assets as a town. You actually own and maintain a lot of roads, and how you can make those streets, and even working with DOT on some of their streets, and how you can make those streets work better for you is part of it. But then you can also think about a town parking lot. And I mentioned Ms. Crawford, but like Town of Aden, for instance, I mean, they have four town-owned parking lots in their downtown. And that's something they've implemented over the course of the last, 5 or 8 years, and when things become available. And so it might be a blend of things, some things short-term and some things more longer-term. But the success downtown that you've had is a great thing, right? Dixie Queen's been there forever, but you've got even more competition for those limited spots now. So that's something that certainly could be a problem.
If I may just interject, the challenge for town-owned parking lots is gonna be space. It's something staff's already talking about in light of the success downtown is seeing with some of the new businesses. But it's gonna be a challenge because obviously space is at a premium and not a lot of it in our downtown area, so.
Some of my concerns are as going along with the connection of the old with the new, but also in our new subdivisions and having more connectivity between subdivisions. I know a lot of them currently usually only get one connection, maybe 2 connections to the next subdivision. I think that it kind of makes every subdivision its own separate entity, and nobody's mingling anymore like they used to. And if we had more connectivity, we could bring families closer, and also make it more accessible for emergency personnel, for our police departments to get around, our fire departments to get in and out of the neighborhoods and take care of people's safety. Another thing too for me is the entrances coming into Winterville and being able to enhance that some more so that when people come in from Greenville, they know they're in Winterville. They're not in Greenville anymore. We're in Winterville. And we want to be proud of our town, and we want them to know that they're in Winterville. And, when we come in on the Old Tar Road section, you really don't know when you're in town and when you're not in town. And so, having more entrances enhanced to, show off our town a little bit more, I think are some good ideas.
Okay, well, I know we're talking about the growth of Winterville and how, people are coming here to retire, and it's a nice place to live and everything. It's a slice of the good life. But what would appeal to me, like he was saying, coming from Greenville to Winterville and making the difference, is the road maintenance. I don't know if that will fall under the Department of Transportation.
Depends on the road.
But yeah, potholes, and there's a lot of roads that needs to be repaired. If I'm someone coming from another town or city or even another state, and I decide to come through Winterville, what I will remember is how the roads are maintained. That'll be appealing to me. That would make me want to tell different ones, hey, Winterville's a nice place to live. They got nice roads. What she was talking about, the parking and everything. All of those things come into effect when you're trying to appeal and make a certain place more valuable to live in, or more beautiful, a place that can be remembered more than anything else. And that's their experience as they're traveling through the town, as to how they're going to decide if they're going to stay.
Okay.
I've been living here all my life outside of Winterville, and I have seen it go from 800 people to what it is here now. And I realize they have a whole lot of problems that needs to be worked out. But all we can do is work on them one at a time, I reckon.
one stole my thunder. I'm passionate about the old downtown, and it needs to be preserved at all cost. And I was sitting here making some notes. Back in the 40s, 50s, we had 3 grocery stores, a laundry, a pool hall, Five and Dime, large mercantile store, the Dixie Queen, of course, and 3 active service stations, and a workable depot with a train that stopped here. And a lot of that has disappeared, and I just think we need to take some action to preserve whatever is left. Signage is another thing I think we need, and I've espoused this for some time. We need to do something about some kind of signage for downtown that is standardized. Basically, that's it.
And I think there's some information in the plan, even the downtown graphics, we actually colored the historic buildings that still exist in purple. So if you want to look back at that, I mean, there are still a number of like historic buildings still intact downtown. You know, how does new development happen around them is something that's important, and how do we preserve them? So yeah, that's good.
My name's Doug Killian, and I'm kind of a outspoken person, so I'm going to start by an observation. As you get older, you don't worry quite so much. But of this planning board, I'm very proud of this planning board. There are 9 members on this planning board, 4 of them that are workers. They're working day to day, supporting their families. They took time off from work to be here, and I think that's outstanding, in contrast to our town council. I will say that when you started out this meeting, you said that basically this is a public document that was developed by the public. And there were 2 key responses that I noticed, because I've been on it with you, Jake, since the beginning, basically. But the public wanted sidewalks. That was a high priority. And they also wanted green space. So I think those are the 2 things that we as a town should incorporate into our statutes and our zoning, that the sidewalks be mandated. Also, if you look into the document on page 48, there is a urban neighborhood, and it calls for sidewalks on both sides. And I think that that is important, because that's a high-density area. And I don't know whether the town council remembers, but they had a consideration of a high-density area northwest of here, and they voted it down. But that area fits this new zoning land use, and it needs to be, we need to accommodate these sidewalks on both sides. The green space, when you showed the 2 examples of the subdivisions, which had the same amount of lots, but one of them had 40% green space, I think that should be a high priority. And I'm going back to a major subdivision that we have coming, the Bill Clark subdivision. If that would have been in effect at that time, I think it would have had wholehearted support of the town if it would have had the variation of lot size with the increased green space. I think that is a high priority, but I want to go back to this urban neighborhood. We need to have sidewalks on both sides. And I'll bring up one other little issue. On Beacon Drive, we're having development coming now. There's a new growth up there on Beacon Drive. There should be a sidewalk mandated by this town council to have a sidewalk on that, rather than with the excuse that I've heard they can walk through the parking lots. I don't think that's good growth. I think we need to have a sidewalk on Beacon Drive.
The commercial development sidewalks,
Yes. And I imagine coming out here out onto 11, that growth there should be considered.
So a couple things come to mind, and I was also thinking about it when you were speaking as well, ma'am. As we look at, as Brian brings forward ideas about how to implement these recommendations from the plan, there's a lot of ways to get at the same thing, right? You can create incentive programs, which are a little bit lighter touch, you know. If you provide sidewalks on both sides, you can have slightly smaller lots, or if you do alley loaded, we're willing to let you move your front setback so that you're closer to the street, and you have a porch on the street, and that's nice. And then there's also, we just want this, so just do it. And that's just a requirement, right? And so a lot of times the best way to get what you want, if you know what you want, the best way to get it is to just require it. And that's the cost of doing business in Winterville, you know what I mean? But there's a balancing act, of course, because you know, for every foot of frontage along a street, there are pipes, storm drains, gutters, curbs, roads that have to be maintained by the town, and each one of those has a dollar value. And so you can look at a development and you can say, well, we have larger lots and the house is worth maybe a little more because they have to put a bigger house on a bigger lot to make the numbers work on the development side. But from the town side, if we had gotten a little bit more density in there and a little bit smaller house, overall that land would have carried more value because you got two houses now, and everyone knows the bulk of the value is in the house, not the land necessarily. And from that respect, then it's a little bit easier. Those properties then might be contributing positively to the town versus if you have a really large lot, you might actually be a maintenance burden on the town. So there's a balance, and getting it in the right spot is important. And sidewalks is one of those balancing acts.
And one of those things, those two concepts, like the graphic of a conventional subdivision versus conservation subdivision, there's another thing to think about that conservation subdivision. There's some alley-loaded lots, and the actual length of
These are alley loaded right here.
the actual length of public streets would probably be about 30% less than up here, because you have some alleys, and those alleys likely would be privately maintained, because they wouldn't necessarily be public alleys. So that's something to think about too. The maintenance cost of any new development and what you're going to be incurring is something that's important.
You said alley loaded lots.
Yeah. So if you, and there's a recommendation in the plan, if you get below about 50 foot frontage, then you really need to start thinking about getting the driveway in the back on an alley, so that you don't have just driveway after driveway after driveway and narrow, because then that's when you get snail houses, because you can't fit anything more than a garage on that property. So that once you get kind of these narrower lots, you need to start thinking about encouraging or requiring the garages to be around back.
That's a
So
new,
these would be little, small streets, right?
these would be private alleyways, and I have worked in some other jurisdictions where there's some really nice developments that have those alleyways
No, I
in the
know.
back, and the garages and the drives are on the back. And it's new for Winterville, but it's a neat concept, and they're really nice looking. And so we don't have the responsibility of those alleyways and trying to maintain those.
Okay.
And it's safer for a pedestrian too, even if you just do it on one side of the street and then have driveways on the other, you can actually walk along that street and you know, if you have a child, and they're riding a bike on the sidewalk,
Yes.
you don't have to worry about, you know, an SUV backing out every
Exactly.
20, you know, or 50 feet. So.
I'm concerned about, you say alley loaded, I'm thinking about small roads. Just a small road in the back,
They are small, but they're
And-
not, they're private.
Yeah, but there's
and they would be
design
maintained by
standards
who?
Well, a lot of times they're maintained by HOA.
Yeah,
or-
okay,
or
yeah.
the landowner. But, you know, there's some standards you have to do in place with that, because you gotta have fire, access.
That's right.
You know, so even though there might be a narrow lane, you have to have a certain access and 5 foot on
That's
each
right.
side or something, where you can get a fire truck down there if you need to, and, you know, so there's some things that if you, it's not just saying, okay, we can do alleys, or you have to do alleys, it's also defining those standards too, to make sure that you're, you know, covered.
And you make a good point there. Again, it's different from what we normally do, but yet it's still well planned, and there's still standards in place that would regulate how they're implemented.
I'm just thinking about maintenance and in the long run, you know, who would maintain it, that kind of thing.
It's all set up in the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah, and you got to get the design's got to be right so that you can run a garbage truck down there without busting up the road. And
Okay.
typically, the best alleys I've seen are usually about 17 feet wide, 16 feet wide on a 20-foot right-of-way. And then you got to get the garage setbacks right too, because people are going to want to put a garage there. But this is kind of an example of a place Jake and I were recently. And so that's the private alley right there. And then this is kind of the front of the homes on these public roads. And I'm trying to drop the little guy down there so we can kind of take a quick look, but you'll kind of notice he always looks the wrong way.
That's me trying to use it.
Yeah. You'll kind of notice they're closer to the sidewalk, right? There's only about, I don't know, 5 or 6 feet, maybe 8 feet. But the landscaping makes it to where you can still kind of just be hanging on your porch and not necessarily have to talk to everyone walking their dog. But you can if you want to. And these houses, you know, they address the street. They have a public space, but there's a little privacy. And then in the back, I bet I can even pop this guy on the alley. And you can see that all the mailboxes were out front. In the back, though, it gets the cars off the street. The street was narrower out front. There's no on-street parking there, although some people will when they got to drive off and pick up. But they still have a little bit of space out here, but it's definitely more of an urban feel, right? It's definitely more urban, but the feel is still community. It's still connected. It's still nice. See the trees in between the curb and the sidewalk? Now the public works director is probably going to hang me out to dry if I say that I like it. Okay. These are the best thing ever.
He's always had with a sick child, he wanted to be here, but just go ahead. None of those guys will tell him so.
But there's also parks in this. So if you all these homes front a park.
Yeah.
You know, and that is not a town built or maintained space. So it's not like you just allow small lots and don't do anything else, right? And this is very different than those bad examples that I showed you, right? So it's kind of, you know, you allow some flexibility, but you also ask something in exchange for that in order to get a better neighborhood.
And some of maybe some you've worked on, and this sort of looks like it to me, you can incorporate some of those downtown, more historic feels in some of these developments like this, because you do have the look that has the trees, and it's kind of neat, because you kind of carry that character through. So you'll hear staff, particularly me, at some point start to encourage a different thought about the way we develop here in terms of having some choices, and I think that's what these gentlemen are saying, and the plan's gonna say too, that all lots don't need to be large with large yards, because someone like myself would be really interested in a development like this. I don't do yard work, I don't like it. Yeah, I'm not good at it, so in any event, I just ask that maybe everyone just keep their minds open to something a little different.
Can you talk about how do you guys see the development community responding to these types of development?
You know, so I think if you don't just say no to something, but you say yes, but, like, that's always going to be a more welcome answer than just saying no out front, right? So, and we're not saying like you should have this everywhere, you know? I mean, I think what we're looking for is just these orange areas where it kind of makes sense, where you already have utilities, where you're really really well set up for, and this is where really housing should go. You know, that's, you know, allowing some flexibility in those areas is really what we're talking about here. So, I don't think, you know, it's like, you know, you can do this everywhere and we're all on board with no matter what, but it's saying, you know, we realize we need to be a little bit more open to different kinds of housing and lot sizes, but we need to get something in exchange. And oh, by the way, we can emulate some of the old parts of town and get some of these better designs that we just weren't getting before too. So it could be a win-win, really, if it's done right.
Yep. And I just want to add to that, you'll see there's connectivity, right? There's 3 connections here between that neighborhood and this commercial district. And this is a hot to trot commercial district. They've got a little lawn there through the middle, and they have some movie theater, and they have concerts, and this is your urban neighborhood around if you notice on your map there, the urban neighborhood is not out in places where there's not commercial connected to it. It's in your downtown and up in your commercial areas, and that's the idea, is people want to live next to where they play, generally speaking. And I'll even drop the guy here too, because it's a really interesting development right here. You can kind of see and there's apartments up here. Those are apartments above a ton of shops. But it's downtowny, it's classy, and this town actually has a lot of similarities with Winterville. This is kind of an upscale, previously bedroom community next to a state economic engine. You know, a big town that's a big economic engine, but it's a step above that town in a lot of respects.
Huntersville, at Burkdale Village in Huntersville, it's just north of Charlotte.
You know, I like the idea of having the apartments above the commercial retail, downtown areas, you know, it kind of gives you that downtown area feel, even though you're not really in the downtown area. And I know that Winterville has always been very negative about wanting to install multifamily, but I know that on the tax side, though, that helps increase our revenues. And still, if we had something like that, we would still have the beautification of it all and still able to increase the tax base.
Yeah, so, I mean, and right now, looking at your central business district or your central business transition overlay district, setting some parameters for, apartments above commercial or something like that, would be a good idea, in advance of, getting a proposal that may or may not be what you want. So, I mean, that's something proactive that can be done, to kind of get to that point.
I think one of the greatest concerns, my first neighborhood living here was in a duplex neighborhood, is with the apartments and high density places is investors coming in, and all it is an investment. They're not vetted in the community,
Right.
and renting out tenants and other folks, and then you have what you have in some of the places that are butting up against Winterville in Greenville. Now, I'm thinking Sterling Point out here. That was a nice neighborhood. People bought and built out there, but then the owners pulled out and left it to tenants and other ones, and so those who aren't as mobile and can't sell, can't get out of that particular neighborhood, now have to live with people who have no vested interest in keeping it beautiful and other things. So that is one of the things I think, and my tenure on the board has been why large density just isn't the appeal for us. Yes, it's good. We want East Carolina graduates to come here when they graduate, not necessarily while they're in school, because they have.
And I mean, fundamentally, from a development ordinance perspective, you can't regulate who owns that property.
Right.
So you have to make sure that when that is built in 20 years, it's going to look better than it does today, and it's going to contribute to kind of your feel of your town. Whoever can promise whatever they want to promise, but at the end of the day, you're building something that's going to be here for 50 years. So keeping the standards high, even if it is rental, like keeping the standards high to where it's fine. There's going to be a quality renter in there. That's really important.
Yep. Partnering those high density locations with the commercial draw so that people want to live there because of that interplay, because it's a lifestyle experience. But also, fortunately, the state legislature has not taken away our ability to regulate the architectural look and standards of multifamily developments.
Attached.
Yep. So if you want it to be made out of solid gold, you can literally require that. Yeah, we don't often recommend that, but it doesn't have to be a ephes or whatever. It can be brick all the way up and down with all kind of fenestrations and windows and glazings and all kind of stuff. Yes, sir.
I'm Willie Hines, and I was born in Pitt County, but I moved to Lenoir County and retired in Lenoir County, but I always had loved Winterville. And I'm so glad I'm a part of this planning board and seeing Winterville grow. It had really grown since I've been back here. I retired in Kingston. I've been back here 19 years. I was turned to move back here, so I'm back here just to see the town of Winterville growing. It's a pleasure with me. I'm so glad that I'm on the town board and seeing this town grow.
So what kind of growth do you see as most beneficial to the town over the next year or two, or where do you see what areas maybe even should be
And different
prioritized?
areas I never saw, like, out here on Rio Branch Road, Magnolia, that subdivision out there, and different parts of the section going out here, Tyler Road, going out Tyler Road. And I never seen it grow this, like this group, going out Tyler Road used to be another farmland out there, most of it was farmland out there.
And Reed Ranch is one of those areas where, even though there's not a lot out there now,
No.
there's a couple subdivisions, I mean, it's
That's right.
very close to, where we're located, so that is a great opportunity.
It is, it is, it really is.
Okay, all right. Well, I think two things primarily come to mind as far as what I see as the most important. And that is, I've been here for January made 19 years. And I had this ideal that I was moving to Winterville and it had this great downtown. And I was going to be walking to downtown all the time and experiencing that. And then I realized, though we do have a downtown, it is certainly not what my colleague here said, what she described from years ago. And so that would be my main desire, to see a downtown that has that. I think you just used the term family or the lifestyle experience of a downtown, but also the residents want to come down. People from other towns, oh, let's go to Winterville. So that, and I'm okay with the apartments or whatever, marrying the residential with the commercial. I think that's cool, but of course we do need to be sensitive to what happens when we have students perhaps living in the family places. So yeah, the downtown feel, I think that it's beautiful. It just makes you proud of where you live. It's attractive commercially and otherwise. And the other point, I shared with Brian a little, Brian, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, about ways to get input, ongoing input from residents. I shared an app with him that the city of Greenville uses, City Compass. And even though I think, everybody is hugely busy, we know that. So I think probably when we have a problem as a resident, we get highly involved. We get involved and educate ourselves on processes and all of that. But when life is good, you don't have time for public meetings and that sort of thing. But I love the City Compass app because even though I'm not a Greenville resident anymore, I love it because I have to travel. I work in Greenville. I have to travel Greenville roads, and when I see something, I say something. I'm just that type of person, and it's engaging, any time of the day. And I can find out who's on the council. I can find out information about the city of Greenville, but also have input and have a cool way of sharing it. And so I just think it's a great app, and maybe even though I think we do a lot in the way of getting feedback, utility bill, even though I never look at the stuff that's in my utility bill, honestly. But I mean, we that's a great, it's still a great tool. But I think I think it's an attractive way that keeps up with the times of getting input. Even if we did, I don't know, some kind of mass appeal to get people signed up, if we were to develop an app or something, and then, send out notifications, and then let it just be maybe an emphasis on one major thing a month, not something that's overwhelming, because people are just not going to keep up with that. We just are too busy.
We have not drilled down into an app yet, but it's been on the radar, and I have heard of that, so I may call my cohorts over there and just kind of figure that out. If they're using it and they're finding success and you've used it, then certainly something that's similar may work for us, so thank you for that. Yeah.
I mean, this land use plan really was part of a community conversation. I mean, we didn't talk to everybody in Winterville, but there was a lot of people that took time out of their days, evenings, to come and give us feedback and take the survey and kind of give us some direction. And I mean, that conversation needs to continue. And as Ms. Robertson said,
And the last thing, and this is really tied into the first item that I mentioned, we tend in this town of Winterville, there seems to be the attraction to neighborhoods, but not really the town. I think, and that's shown by how many beautiful neighborhoods we have, but I don't know that, where is that nucleus? Where is that glue? You know, and that's, again, the appeal of a downtown that just offers a lot. And so the sidewalks, I am all about a sidewalk. You know, I wish Old Tar Road was wide enough to have sidewalks, you know, that kind of thing.
It's coming.
Oh, well, praise God. All right.
We may all suffer before it gets here, but it's coming.
Well, that was a great roundtable. I appreciate that. I did have identifying responsible town departments, but I feel like, you know, that's probably a matter for staff to, you know, volunteer and raise their hands, or to be delegated perhaps.
Ms. Robertson and I.
Oh, yes, of course. I'm so sorry, Ms. Robertson.
Well, I'm Veronica Robertson, and everybody knows I've been here forever, 67 years right now. So, I've seen it grow too, like Mr. Browley says. You know, we were a little bitty town with Clover Farm and Boyd Store and Ainge and all that. So, at that time, we had a downtown, didn't we? It was a booming downtown, Ms. Claiborne. You remember the stores and stuff too. I remember you talking about them. The one thing that I've been watching and I've had to change my opinion about is the variety of housing options. I very much like most of the people that started in our, quite a few people in our survey. Big house, big lot. I couldn't see you putting a big house on a small lot. But then I thought about it. No one wants to keep up all that grass around there. More and more people are moving from that concept of so much maintenance. And if you're gonna, and really, if you're gonna invest money, you need to invest in living space. So that was something I had to come into the, I guess, 21st century with that concept of that we don't have enough of a variety of housing options. We have low-income apartments, we have houses, but we don't have anything for that person who is, just wants to pay regular rent, you know? So that was something I felt like we needed to do. I love the idea of connectivity for lots of reasons. It's kind of hard to live in the area. You got to come all the way out of the area to get to something that's right behind you. Hillcrest Park is an example of that. You're right behind the post office, but you can't get there that way. You got to come out and go all the way around to Main Street to get there. There are other areas in our town that are the same way. I like to, Don has done a good job of putting stuff on next door. I've been noticing a lot of our notices about days our offices are not open and things like that pop up right there on next door. And I think it's on Facebook too, it's done. Both of them. And that really is good for the people that get into social media much more. Right here today, I learned about that alley access houses, and that looks really good. That looks as a good concept for us. But our downtown, one thing I talked about is we don't have, like our parades and stuff, the Watermelon Parade, Festival Parade, does not go downtown. It doesn't go downtown. So some of the things that have not promoted growth in our downtown area are things that we're doing. Everywhere else I go, parade, all the parades, you know, they go through the downtown area or major commercial area. Greenville's gone back to going down Evans Street, which they did when I was a young girl. They're going, you know, that was major commercial area. And we need to do that more. Our market on the square is really good because it's bringing people downtown more. They're seeing the stores, they're seeing the things that's down there. But we do need to do more emphasis on that. Those are the things I got, my observations. And I did serve on the steering committee, and I got to meet a lot of people and hear a lot of things from the residents, which was a good experience for me.
Yeah, that's one public engagement factor that we never really can measure. which is how many members in the steering committee have had conversations with their neighbors and their friends and people they meet, and how did that trickle into the plan? Because it does, and the steering committee is very active in that respect.
I just wanted to, if I had one large goal, and all of these things are excellent and would be on my radar, but I would just ask for flexibility and a little more open mind. Ms. Robertson and I had lots of conversations about what Winterville looks like moving forward. And I think there are a lot of places doing some really good things. These gentlemen are familiar with, I'm sure, lots of them. The developments may look a little different than what we currently have, but it's good growth, and that's what we want. Good, positive growth that keeps us where we want to be and moving forward.
And I wanted to say this, our board, we got 2 members that have said they're not here, and we do have 1 member that may be dealing with a family issue.
Right.
I don't know right now, but, you know, it's not a lack of interest, but it's a lot, you know, sometimes we have issues that will prevent us from doing things like that. And we did vote for this meeting, so we were all in agreement for it. But please excuse at least, you know, those that may be doing things that we wouldn't be here either if we had to deal with.
I know Tony and Ricky were really involved in the plan too, so. Right, well, we kept y'all a little bit longer than we thought. Do you have any closing thoughts before we adjourn?
I do. I wanted to thank you gentlemen and your firm, in addition to all of staff, for the involvement in bringing this plan together. It was so desperately needed for so long, and if it weren't for the good work of all of you, we couldn't have what we have. So thank you for that, and thank you for driving in that terrible weather this morning. I hope it's better on the way back, though the forecast is not really calling for it.
I'd like
Thank
to
you.
thank everybody that's here, everyone, our staff,
Absolutely.
all
Thank
our
you
planning
all.
board members for meeting with us on this issue and the interest of us here in town. We're interested because we live here, and we want our community to be a great place to live. We want it to truly represent a slice of the good life and be a community for everyone, inclusive, not exclusive.
Absolutely.
So we didn't get an approval of agenda, of course, but I just will, if any other concerns or anyone has anything to say. Yes, ma'am?
Could we not afford to pay our electric bill?
What'd you say? What'd you say?
I thought I heard Ms. Clyburn, but Robert's over there going,
And it is great. It's great to live in a community where you have people that are interested enough
Absolutely.
to show up and actually share and realize that they do have part in what goes on. So whether it's right or wrong, we've got a part in it, and we need to participate. If nothing else, we don't need a motion to adjourn because we didn't get a motion to start, so I won't say if our minds and hearts are.
we will be putting together, obviously there won't be formalized minutes for approval, but we will be putting together recaps from the meeting, and if these gentlemen would share their PowerPoint, we'll get that out to everyone too.
And share it with your family, your friends, talk about our planning and,
Absolutely.
and their insights into our neighborhoods. If nothing else, the meeting is adjourned. Thanks to everybody coming.
Thank you so much.
If you want to, we have recorded this, and it's gonna be on YouTube. You can go back and watch it again.